Is Texas A&M football an 8-4 program? On this episode of the Locked On Aggies podcast.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to this episode of the Locked On Aggies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Joey Ikes. I'm joined again today by my good friend, Cameron Ohnysty. Thanks so much for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Cameron, 8-4. So this all dates back to an anonymous coach, which everything, as Jimbo said, we'll talk about here in a minute, anonymous quotes and things like that always are interesting to hear and read, because when you don't have to put your name on something, it's real easy to say whatever you want. But an anonymous coach in a column by Athlon Sports, which was kind of a fun column that they put together, told Athlon Sports, I'm going to read the quote, Jimbo Fisher might be a mad genius when it comes to media because they get talked about alongside Georgia and Alabama, and they are every bit an 8-4 program. He knows it too, but I think that's part of the plan. Cameron, what is your take on this quote?
All right. So, first of all, how do we describe an 8-4 program? Okay. How I would describe an 8-4 program when anybody, and let's go back to, this was an anonymous person. We don't even know. I mean, they say coach. Who knows at this point? I mean, I'm going to guess it's a coach, but we'll never know.
Exactly.
What an 8-4 program, in my opinion, is an average program with an average coach, an average AD, average recruiting every year, recruiting a team that, people know about and they cheer, the fan base loves, but the national media doesn't really care about. And if they go 8-4 every season, it's a win. Describing that for A&M we could go back to Kevin Sumlin even at the beginning. No, I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing I've heard in a long time. And we've heard some really ridiculous things shot at A&M over the last couple of months, and especially Jimbo Fisher. But Jimbo Fisher has every right, and I guarantee a lot of non-Aggie people would back me up on this to say, look, why would I respond to something like this? This is a ridiculous this is somebody who obviously doesn't watch us, doesn't really understand what we're doing, and they're just kind of looking at last year's results, and we all know last year's results were based on quarterback issues, injuries, depth chart problems, and going 8-4 was mainly because they didn't play in their bowl game at the end of the season because of COVID-related problems that a lot of teams were dealing with. Yeah. So it's a cheap shot. It's it's not surprising, but this is where we're at, and it's going to keep coming, especially when the season starts. So we're all ready for it, and we'll keep commenting on it. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of it comes from, A&M sort of had, at least for a long time before they laid out the money to hire Jimbo and all these sorts of things and try to really take a step up in the level of what they were doing. They built, what you could argue was a relatively well-earned reputation of being a program that got a lot of preseason accolades and was always very well thought of because of the amount of money that goes into the program, because of the size of the school, all these sorts of things, that this is a program that should be one of those top-level blue blood college football programs that you do talk about alongside Georgia and Alabama, and then they would fall off the train somewhere, and of course, one of these programs you play, Kent State or Sam Houston State or something like that early in the year. You start out, 5-0, and you get into conference play, you lose a few games, and you wind up 8-4, and there's all this hype early in the year, and it falls off. And so I think there is a bit of a well-earned reputation from, like you said, with the exception of the first couple of years under Kevin Sumlin, for most of the last 15 or 20 years or so, A&M has been an 8-4 program that, if A&M had the same recruiting process and the same players
Sure.
and had stayed in the Big 12, they would have been a 10-2 or 11-1 program over the course of the last few years, because their second best conference game would have been, Iowa State instead of being, LSU or something like that. And so they probably win more games and win a conference championship and, advance to a college football playoff. Maybe they don't contend at that level up until now. But I think that is where this is coming from. And it's ignoring the things like you talked about of the fact that A&M they are recruiting at the level of Georgia and Alabama. They do have a depth chart now that is capable of competing with Georgia and Alabama on the field. They beat Alabama on the field last year, all those sorts of things. Like, they are ignoring whoever this anonymous, offensive quality control coach or whoever it is that they interviewed for this column. They're ignoring all of those factors that you mentioned, and they're trying to take advantage of this Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban sort of deal and play off of Jimbo and who he is as a person. And I mean, he's one of 5 coaches in college football who've won a national championship. Like, he is at the pinnacle of what college football coaches are in the country right now, with one of the best, brightest defensive coordinators in the country, and just an absolute loaded roster. The main question comes back to quarterback, and we're not going to have that conversation now, but I really think that's part of what's driving it and what has sort of pushed this this feeling out there. And I got a text from a buddy who my buddy Zach, who runs the Locked On Auburn podcast, on August the 4th, who sent me a happy Texas A&M Day text on 8/4. And it's okay, he's having fun, I get it, but it's that sort of sentiment that it definitely exists out there, that's what A&M is. And until the 10-2 seasons start to become the norm instead of the exception, then A&M is going to continue to be talked about that, even if they don't operate that way, even if they are even if they are one of the few programs that is, really striving to go from an 8-4 team to a 10-2 or 11-1 or even, a 12-0, not miracle, but, dream scenario season that pops up every now and then. I think that's part of what's driven it. What did you think of Jimbo's response that he gave to the media this week? And how would you have responded any differently or the same if you were in Jimbo's shoes?
Well, if you read the rest of the anonymous comments from the anonymous coaches or anonymous coaches making comments for the rest of the SEC teams, and you look at Missouri, you look at Vanderbilt, and I think Ole Miss was really great. I mean, Jackson Dart is one of the transfer QBs from USC. And there's been a lot of mustering about he's not doing very well in camp, and they don't know if he's the guy. Well, the anonymous coach was very nice, and he just said, oh, well, if he is the guy, they're going to be really great. And they're talking about, scheme and, what they're going to how this player is going to impact the team. Then you get to A&M, and it's just, he's an imposter, and this guy just doesn't have. I think this is all part of the plan, which I don't understand what that means. 8-4 is a part of what plan? What devious plan does Jimbo Fisher have up his sleeve? But look, I love the way he responded. I would have said the same thing: is you don't give them fodder. You're focused on fall camp. You're focused on figuring out who the quarterback's going to be. You're focusing on how this roster is going to shape out in week 1 on September 3rd. You're looking at who is going to be my starting defensive end, my starting edge, my starting defensive tackle, my starting linebacker rotation. I mean, most of that. But this is camp battles are everything for these guys right now. And like he said, this is one of the more talented staffs he has. And guys like DJ Durkin, obviously a defensive coordinator, but guys like Tyler Santucci, the linebacker coach, who was also one of the assistant defensive coordinators. That guy is up and coming. That guy is motivated, and that's one of the guys who Jimbo knows is going to go somewhere one day. So he's focused on getting these coaches their opportunities later. He's focusing on his team. and he's focusing on finally getting to the college football playoff this season. He is not, and you can tell when he gets asked those questions, he'll give you that nice Jimbo smirk and say, you know what, let's move on. Let's talk about the team. And I really don't care what these people say, because I guarantee one of the guys who made this comment was somebody who worked for me 20 years ago and didn't like me very much. And I think that's where a lot of people and a lot of coaches know where this kind of stuff comes from. And and look, if they want to take it on because they're bored or something and go, well, you know what does he know? It's just not worth it. And I love that he's done that with pretty much everything aside from Nick Saban kind of spat, but that was different. That was more personal. But he's not gonna give time to guys who he doesn't know who they are, and frankly, it's Athlon is making content like we all do, so it's not their fault. But
Absolutely, it's not Athlon's fault, and they are almost obligated to publish something like that when they get it, because people like us are going to talk about it, and we're going to write about it at AggiesWire, and everybody's going to cover it, right? And so nobody's blaming Athlon. Jimbo's not either, and it's one of those that, just like I said a minute ago, Jimbo knows that the only way for people to stop saying that A&M is an 8-4 program, or that they're imposters, or that he's some sort of circus master, in the 3 rings, sort of shape shifting everything, is for A&M to go out and win 10 games this year again for the second time in 3 years, and make noise in the SEC West for the first time in a couple of years, and for one of the few times in the course of the time that they've been there. We're going to talk about the offensive line and how that will impact A&M's ability to make that sort of noise in the SEC West. But first, I've got to tell you guys about Bet Online. Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. Bet Online continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting to scores and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to Bet Online today, or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. Bet Online, where the game starts. Okay, Cameron, there are some interesting things happening in fall camp. A&M had their first off day of camp since the start of camp on Tuesday. But leading up to that, there's been some interesting, I don't know if shuffling is the right word. I've been using that word a lot in terms of the coaching staff and the merry-go-round that happened there. But there's been some interesting things that have gone on with the offensive line. Trey Zuhn, redshirt freshman, really high-level recruit from a year ago, sort of the presumed starter at left tackle, took the snaps there in the spring. The reviews were really good. He looks really great. Starts the fall season with an illness and is unable to start practice with the team. And Ogunbiyi takes the first team reps there during the time when he's gone. Then on Sunday, I believe, which was the open practice, Trey Zuhn's first practice back with the team. Trey steps in, takes the left tackle snaps as the first string left tackle, and Ogunbiyi moves inside to guard. But then on Monday, Aki goes back out to left tackle, and Trey goes to second team left tackle, and they plug another guard in. What do you think's going on here? Is this a rotation type thing that we need to be watching for? Is there a real life competition going on at left tackle that none of us saw coming? Or is this just something where they're sort of trying to find their best 5 up front, and we'll see how it goes from there?
So I think it might be the latter. I think Jimbo, he knows right now who his set starters are on the offensive line, and especially the right side. But yeah, I think he might be looking at kind of an insurance situation where Trey is probably still kind of coming back slowly, and he just doesn't want to. He doesn't want to risk re-injury right now with him, and he wants to know what he has in Aki, knowing he is one of the more versatile offensive linemen on the team, and he's dealt with his own injury problems over the years. So I think with trying to utilize his versatility right now, trying to figure out, okay, if we need him to shift out because of injury, because of just it doesn't mesh for the first, let's say, 2 weeks of the season, then they know what they have. They know what they have in him at the left tackle spot, one of the probably the most vital spot on the offense, aside from the quarterback, in my opinion. And they really need to know who's going to be protecting the blind side. But we need to know if Trey can't go, if Trey just has problems throughout the season, whether injury or just play. We have a guy in there that we can shift in, and we know we have good depth at that position. But at the same time, you need depth everywhere. So knowing that he can play at the guard position as well. But really, aside from him, they have great depth at the offensive line in almost every position. I'd say maybe the left tackle is the position where the depth is a little less. And so knowing that you have another great athlete, a guy with great feet, good movement, very athletic, that can take on that position when needed. I mean, it's smart, and do it now. Do it early, because the season is a month away. So
yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get into some of these inter squad scrimmages over the course of the next few weeks, and that's when all this stuff will really start to sort out, and when any depth chart changes will start to really pop up. But it was just interesting to me because they did take Tuesday off, and so it's not like Trey needed a day off after a day of practice. It's not like he sat out the full practice. He went to the second team, and so you just wonder. Yeah. And with this being Coach Steve Addazio's first year at A&M, it's his first exposure to a lot of these guys. Other than the spring, this is his first full year of exposure to these guys. So it just sort of feels like you hear these NFL teams use the term we're trying to get our best 5 guys on the field, and it sort of feels like they're trying to figure out whether having Aki at guard and Zuhn and Trey at left tackle is better, or having Aki at left tackle and having somebody else play left guard is a better scenario. And there's been some shuffling at left guard too, even when Aki's at left tackle. So they're clearly, I think, trying to solve, like you said, the right side of the offensive line feels relatively set, especially at guard. That's extremely solid. Right tackle played really well last year also. They're trying to really, resolve that left side of that offensive line, and they're just trying to find whatever solution they have available to them.
Yeah, and I have one more point. I think that, and Aki comes from a run-first offense in high school. So when he came in, he was one of the best run blockers in the country coming out. And they knew that, but it was interesting when he came to A&M, he was slated to become a tackle, and he really needed to understand pass protection. And that was something that throughout the years, learning technique, working on his footwork, and kind of building his body in that way. So it is fascinating, because he is a product that I'll compare him almost to, not to Tyler Smith for the Cowboys, but that's a guy who has potential out of this world. And and I'm not saying Aki is Tyler Smith, but I am saying that I've heard nothing but good things about what the potential he has, especially the tackle position. I think so you're right. Steve Addazio, in his first season, one of the best O-line coaches out there. He's really trying to see, what do I have in all these guys, and is this the best starting 5 we have, or is this the best starting 5? This is what you do in camp, but it is fascinating, because all we've heard all season is Trey's in, and Jimbo Fisher said it himself. He is the starter at left tackle. So
yeah, and so you just wonder, maybe Aki looked great over the course of the first few days, and those are unpadded practices and shells and shorts and stuff like that. Yeah. So how much can he really, how much can you really evaluate that play? But then again, Steve Addazio is a much better offensive line evaluator than I am, so he probably has the ability to do that for sure.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's just interesting there, and you add into that the fact you're dealing with the injury that it must not be too serious, because Jimbo hasn't really addressed it with Bryce Foster, the center. But he's yet to practice. It's funny, there's some videos from the open practice at Kyle Field on Sunday, and he's in street clothes, snapping and doing some of the drills, not officially participating in practice, but it's one of those things, you get these guys around the field. And they're not he doesn't have a sling on an arm, or he's not on crutches. And they're not doing full contact. he's going to snap and do his footwork and stuff. But, he snapped the ball and took his, sort of run, zone blocking footwork to the left side after he snapped it. And you could just see sort of the grimace as he took his steps towards the camera. Where
it does show, man. He's tough.
It's impossible to speculate. We don't want to speculate on what the injury might be, especially considering, Jimbo hasn't brought it up. And when he's been asked about it, he hasn't directly addressed it, which makes me sort of feel like, maybe it's not something that's super serious. They're just being very cautious about it. What's your take there? What's your take on the guy who's been backing him up, Matthew Wyckoff, and what that means there for the Aggies offense?
Yeah, and Bryce Foster, I'll take that with a grain of salt. I mean, I think we both will. Is that he's one of those proven starters. I mean, he's only a sophomore, but he was one of the best centers in the country last year as a freshman, and he's just one of those natural prospects that just kind of comes in, and when he gets the chance to play, he just goes off running, and he's been fantastic. But it is a little worrisome because we have seen that in the past with players who have sat out throughout fall camp and kind of just stood in the sidelines, like you said, in street clothes, and you kind of wonder, well, I mean, it probably isn't that bad because they probably tell us, but they're not going to tell us everything, and that's the thing. Personally, I think it's probably just something minor that he's rehabbing and he just wants to be with his teammates, and I mean that's totally understandable. But I do believe that he's too important to the point where if it is something serious, we're going to hear something pretty soon, because that is a position with a new quarterback coming in that is very, very vital. And we know that no quarterback likes pressure up the middle. I mean, if you're athletic enough, pressure from the sides, pressure off the edge is, you can avoid that, but you need your anchor, you need your guy. But with Matthew Wyckoff, he's an interesting athlete. He played a couple games, I believe, last year. I don't know if he Now he might. No, I'm trying to think. I don't know if he's played a lot of games at center, but he is extremely versatile, and he is somebody I think Jimbo does have a lot of confidence in. If for some reason, and I'm not speculating, for some reason, if Bryce had to miss a game at the beginning of the season, having Matthew Wyckoff, he's been in the system for a while. I think he knows what he's doing. I think he's good enough of a blocker, especially at that interior, to where you don't need to be extremely worried yet. But we're not even close to anything like that. So really, right now it's speculation. But in the next week or so, if Bryce is not practicing, if he's still standing out there in street clothes and just kind of watching, then yeah, it's something to be a little worried about.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there that it's not time to worry yet on Bryce Foster, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on in this second week of practice, especially because of the protocols. These guys have to practice in shorts for a couple of days before they can put pads on and really get involved.
For sure.
So if we don't see him taking the field in shorts for a couple of practices over the course of the next week or so, we'll probably come back to this conversation next Wednesday and probably have a little higher level of concern.
Yeah.
We're going to move on here in just a second and talk a little bit about recruiting with a couple of specific guys and some fun, interesting news. So the University of Southern California, it was announced on Tuesday that against the wishes of the school itself and the football program, there is a fan or booster group that is putting together an NIL collective with the goal and the plan being that they are going to provide the equivalence of a base salary to USC football players. And I believe basketball players are included in that too. I could be wrong there. But the reason this is interesting to us as an A&M podcast is, the momentum for A&M in relation to Malachi Nelson, the quarterback who's been committed to USC for a long time, is building. The wave there, the moment, the drum beat, to quote my good friend Sigmund Bloom on the NFL and fantasy football podcast world. The drum beat is starting to be relatively consistent that hey, this thing could be real, and that there's potential that a few months from now, when we get closer and closer to signing day, that this is something that could legitimately happen in terms of, one of the top 10 recruits in the country, according to our buddy John Garcia, could be coming to A&M, flipping off of USC. And we know that I don't want to use the word allegations because that's sort of incriminating or whatever, but we know the way that the general media and college football community feels about what A&M does, what their collective, what their boosters do from an NIL standpoint, what the belief is that they do, and how much that matches reality. Who knows without being involved in the process, but there's a lot of speculation that this is in some sort of response to that drumbeat and that momentum being built with Malachi. And there's also the Zachariah Branch visit from earlier in the summer and all that. There's been a little less drumbeat with that since that visit than there has been since Malachi came in for the pool party. But what's your take on this USC thing? What's your take on the Malachi Nelson situation? Do you think this thing really happens? What's your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is I would personally, I'm not a person who works in ranking, but I'd put Malachi Nelson over Arch Manning. I know that's like sacrilegious to say, but it's kind of funny. Malachi Nelson, the way he's being talked about this is the greatest quarterback prospect in years. And look, he's one of the best. I can safely say that. But this is one of the funniest things I've heard in a long, long time is that in order to compete, this is USC. Like that's the thing. USC was recently, I say recently, because I'm 28 years old. So I was still, I was a teenager, maybe almost a teenager, watching USC and Texas play for the national championship game. And I think it was 2005 or 2005.
Yeah, I think it
was.
Was.
Yeah. So I was 11 years old. I remember that game like it was yesterday. And I remember the players that USC had. Texas had Vince Young and some great defenders, but USC had Reggie Bush, and then I believe the backup played in the NFL for about 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he did.
The Titans. Yeah, stud offensive line.
Matt Leinart was the quarterback.
Heisman winner, and every kid who wants to play running back, no matter how old they are, watches the Reggie Bush game versus I think Fresno State. They watched that game. Reggie was just running all over. It's a massacre. It was sad to watch. Those defensive backs must have been like crying, being yelled at in the locker room, like, "You're a failure." But it has not been the same even close. We talk about Texas, and we missed to kind of touch on that and kind of mediocrity over the years and how they're throwing shade at A&M. I think it was 6-7, 5-7, 5-7, 5-7. I think consecutive years of Charlie Strong and Tom Herman. But let's not talk about that. But USC has not even been close to that. They have been better, I guess, for the latter part of the 2000s. But after Pete Carroll left, this thing fell all the way down. You didn't hear from the donors for years. The boosters disappeared. It was bizarre. And USC was never really respected. They still recruited some great players. I don't know. It's just weird, man. It's very odd that they're having to do this now. Because I thought everything was rosy. I thought it was great. You got Lincoln Riley, and you got Addison through NIL. You got a great recruiting class. It looks like you're going to get Zachariah Branch apparently, and I've seen the recruiting. It's pretty good. It looks like a team that's going to contend soon. They're ranked. I think they're top 15, I believe, maybe in the new rankings. This is a program on the rise again, right? And that they're having to do this, like going around Southern California and knocking on doors to raise money for the program. It's weird. It's like the Twilight Zone. I'm like, it's weird, man.
Yeah, and who knows if this was something that's been in the works for boosters that they've been trying to get the school to approve or to be on board with or whatever for a long time. Who knows? I think the timing is definitely interesting, and it's one of those things that you just wonder if you see some of the crowds or lack thereof that USC's had to play in front of at the Coliseum. You know that they're playing at the Coliseum, and how what a facility that is, and all that kind of stuff. And then that you just know that at some point this year, Malachi is going to wind up in College Station for an official visit
Yeah.
when there's a primetime game, and it's going to be 107,000 people swaying back and forth. It's one of those things that, like, it, I know it. We've both been there and sat there. I've sat at field level there before and like just experienced what that feels
insane.
like. And it's absolutely insane. And there's starting to become programs that it feels like realize that A&M, like we talked about earlier, how A&M has sort of built this reputation as this 8-4 program because it was this program that everybody felt like should be able to accomplish more, but wasn't.
Yeah.
And the feeling is, at least for me as an A&M fan and somebody who covers the team, is that is changing in a way that A&M feels like, from administration to coaching staff to player personnel and recruiting to the players themselves, all feel like they're moving in one direction, and that unity of vision and everything is all going in the right spot to where this thing is on its way to being a juggernaut.
For sure.
And these other programs realize it, and they know that there's nothing in college football that compares. And you hear anybody who comes to College Station for a football game, and you hear them before they come for the first time, and they're like, College Station, Texas? What in the world is in College Station, Texas? And to a certain extent, they're right? Like we both been there. We both understand that, right? But the other side of that coin is when you get there and you go show up and stand through midnight yell, and then you turn around, you go to the game the next day, and you just experience what that experience feels like.
For sure.
There's nothing like it that compares in college football. And anybody who goes there for the first time will almost unanimously admit that by the time they finish it. And there's going to be some of these football programs, and we joke that maybe this is something that USC is realizing and why they're trying to put this together. But if you get the atmosphere and we heard Jimbo Fisher give his sales pitch to Colin Cowherd on the radio the other day, right? One of the biggest alumni bases, over 550,000 something living alumni, 107,000 people at every game, an atmosphere like nothing else. One of the 5 college football head coaches with a national championship, brand new facilities, almost unlimited fundraising in terms of facilities and the program itself, unbelievable opportunities in the alumni network, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it finally feels like they are actually leveraging all of those things in the right way to build a juggernaut of a football program. And it's going to be really tough for a lot of these other schools that don't have that that are missing 3 or 4 of those aspects to compete with that, even if they have big legacy football programs and are a traditional blue blood the way USC has been.
Sure.
It's going to start to come to fruition that these programs are going to have to try new and different things to compete with A&M on the recruiting trail and on the field and in facilities and atmosphere and all these sorts of things to try to keep up with what A&M's doing, for sure.
Yeah. And it's really culture, prestige, and the boosters and just a genuine love for the program. And A&M has had that for every decade and coaching, even kind of the mediocre years, that fan base was still around. They went to every game. They showed up because they care. And again, USC is not alone in this. There's a lot of former blue bloods trying to get back to that blue blood status. That it's just odd to see that it's taking so long for the fan base to get back into it. And again, we'll see this year with USC. And now, I mean, I was joking. I'd love to see USC back to power because that makes college football better. Yeah. And so, but we'll see this season. We'll see what the Coliseum looks like, and if those fans show up, which I do expect them to, because of the the allure of Lincoln Riley and that talented offense. So and obviously Caleb Williams, so we can't forget him.
Yeah.
But yeah, and A&M is rising, and that goes back to our first segment of 8-4 program. You're kidding me. This team, this program is going up, and it's not coming down, and that's going to be with Jimbo Fisher at the helm. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something we talk about a lot when we talk about the NFL going back to Los Angeles, was that like there's so many things to do in Los Angeles that if USC's not winning games, people aren't going to spend a Saturday night at the Coliseum for 3 hours to watch USC go 8-4, right? Like they're going to only go and show up if they're putting elite prospects on the field and putting together a 10-2, 11-1, 12-0 season with a chance at a national championship. That's what's going to draw the people. That's enough about USC. Cameron, thanks again so much for joining me tonight.
Good to be here, man.
Today. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for listening. I am your host, Joey Ikes. You can find me on Twitter at Joey Ikes. You can read both Cameron and I's writing at AggiesWire.usatoday.com. Cameron, tell them where they can find you on social media.
So obviously you can find me on Twitter at Cameron Ohnysty, no space, OHNYSTY. And like Joey just said, all my writing at AggiesWire.usatoday.
Absolutely. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Aggies. Follow us on YouTube as well. The YouTube channel is Locked On Aggies. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all those YouTube things. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy and the experts of Locked On go around the SEC in under 30 minutes. Absolute great content. Chris does a great job with that podcast. Make it your second listen today. Thanks so much, Cameron. Have a great day, everybody.